Okay. It's interesting, when I was reading through the Chumash commentary last night, and it says Moses began to expound this law or explain this law, they start saying, well, but then he goes into this history. He's not explaining the law. Okay, and the word law, of course, is Torah. And it makes the point, Torah doesn't mean law. It never meant law. It means instruction. But in point of fact, it has to mean law because he gives case law. And they say in Deuteronomy there are 100 laws, 70 of which are new. Okay, they're not in the previous Torah sections, and so he can't be explaining the law. Okay, so they're kind of looking at Deuteronomy chapter 1 and saying, well, this is a mystery. But I think it comes from a basic misconception. We saw already the book of Deuteronomy parallels the Hittite suzerainty treaty format. Okay, and when he says Torah, he's not talking about individual laws. He's talking about the covenant. Okay, the Torah is the covenant. It's an explanation of the covenant. And in this case, it's a covenant renewal, which, like I said, is just like a Hittite suzerainty treaty. Okay, so when he stands up to explain the Torah, he's standing up to explain the covenant. Okay, and the book of Deuteronomy is a full explanation of the covenant. Okay, beginning again with the history they had in the past and pointing out different failures and why God is dealing with them the way he is, and explaining the situation they're in. So it makes perfect sense to me that he's explaining the Torah, even though they don't get it. And I think this is a case where the rabbis can't see the forest for the trees. If you're standing in the middle of the forest, you can't see the forest, can you? All you see is the trees. And they're looking at the individual laws and getting wrapped up in the individual laws rather than stepping back and looking at the whole picture of what Deuteronomy is. And having a much bigger picture of Deuteronomy for what it is, being a covenant renewal and being actually the covenant between us and God is a treaty, because by nature, should God be at war with us?
No. God, he created us.
But did not Adam rebel?
Yes, that's war as a natural war.
The natural man is at war with God.
Yeah.
Okay. God introduces a covenant of peace with the people of Israel. Okay. He takes them out of Egypt. Okay. So, and I told you that Rashi in his commentary takes the names of all these places and allegorizes them because he didn't know the archaeology, and still today we don't know where all these cities are. So what they did is they took events that paralleled or took place at these locations, or they took the name and allegorized them into an event. And I'm going to read you, Onkelos, who's a commentator, I'm going to read you his translation of the first couple of verses of Deuteronomy, so you see what he did with it. Instead of just naming the place, and the place names are in parentheses in this, but I'll read them out anyway. I'll read you how he translates the first few verses. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel beyond Jordan. He reproved them because they had sinned in the wilderness and had provoked God to anger in the plain, Arabah, of Moab, over against the Red Sea, Suf. They murmured against God in Paran. They had spoken contemptuously, Tophel, concerning the manna, Laban. And in Hazeroth they angered him on account of the flesh and because they made the golden calf, Dizahab. Okay, so you see he's taking, he's allegorizing it, he's writing it right into this translation of the text. Now, that's not a translation, that's an interpretation. Okay, it's kind of like when you look at Jehovah's Witness Bible, it's not a translation, it's an interpretation. Or the Living Bible, it's not a translation, it's his interpretation, what he thinks it means, written in plain English. Okay, so you really have to watch out for what claims to be a translation. And like I said, the best way to study your Hebrew or Greek text, take your 4 major translations, lay them out side by side, and look at where they differ. Then go look up the Greek or Hebrew for where they're different, because that's the issue that's in question. And we'll start doing that eventually in Hebrew once you all learn your way around the letters a little bit better. Okay. So Moses is expositing the principles that Torah is based on. And like we saw in the introduction, the 2 major principles that override or that all the laws hang on are love God and love your neighbor. Okay, he is expositing those principles and how they apply in life. So when he introduces these 100 laws, 70 of which are new, he's just putting more feet on that principle, or how to bring principle down to earth. Okay. Also, the book of Deuteronomy is essentially the last words of Moses. It's what he's saying to people right before he dies. And it was interesting because Humish made the point, and it's a good point. What a person says right before he dies,
It's worth listening to.
yeah, it's worth listening to. In other words, I get to the end of my life, I want to tell you something. Okay, it's going to be based on, well, if I died tomorrow, it'd be based on 57 years of experience, 40 some of it as a believer. Okay, and when I hope I get to talk to my kids before I die and say, look, I have a few things to tell you. I have a few insights for you. Okay, and since I'm going to die, listen closely. And they gave references for three things.
You want to die like a patriarch then.
Yeah.
Because that's what they all did when they were called in their families.
And it's interesting that they all got to die that way.
It is.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All of them got to say their last words to their children before they died.
Yeah.
And pass on the blessing.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like they gave up their lives. And, you know, Jacob blessed his children, and he breathed his last.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's interesting. But you have three cases where you have men giving their last words in Scripture. You have Joshua 24, where Joshua gives his last words. That's what the famous quote comes from. As for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. Okay. Then you have Samuel's farewell words in 1 Samuel 12. And you have David's last words in 1 Kings 2. You know, and gives advice to Solomon on what to do. Worthwhile to look up. Anyway, we left off at verse 9 last time. It said, at that time I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. Yahweh your God has increased your numbers, so that today you are as many as the stars in the sky. May Yahweh, the God of your fathers, increase you 1,000 times and bless you as you promised. But how can I bear your problems and your burdens and your disputes all by myself? Choose some wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will set them over you. Now, that's pretty basic stuff we already know from, you know, reading in the Torah before.
That was his father-in-law's advice.
Right. Jethro looked at him and said, you know, you're sitting there from morning to, you know, dark, you know, judging people's cases, you know, it's too much. And it is. But one key thing here is when he talks about the God of your fathers, okay, that phrase is going to occur 10 more times in Deuteronomy, and every time it's connected to the covenant promises. Okay, the God of your fathers. I made covenants with your fathers, and you're being the recipients of those promises that I made, you know, 500 years ago. Okay, and he also quotes there, today you are as many as the stars in the sky. If you remember back to Genesis, twice God promises Abraham that he will have a multitude of children. Once he says they'll be like the sand of the shore, and once he says they'll be like the stars in the sky. Neither of which can you count. Okay, we know that there are stars beyond the stars. Okay, so there is no counting of the stars. But he asks the people, says, okay, go ahead and put some people forward that you think will be good leaders, and you know, I'll ordain them to the position. Now, in Deuteronomy 4, verses 6 and 8, you find the kind of a definition that God puts on what wise men are. Because there's all kinds of different wisdom. In Deuteronomy 4:6 it says this, talking about the laws. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them the way Yahweh our God is near to us whenever we pray to him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I'm setting before you today? That's God's view of wisdom. It's not just how to get things done, which is the traditional view of wisdom, but it's, do you see through God's eyes? Back when I was in college, somebody actually wrote a song, and it was, you know, if I could see this world the way God sees it, okay, I would behave very differently. And the song was really good insight for the people who wrote it. I think back and I sometimes wonder if sometimes the better theology isn't in the music than it is in the classroom. Okay. Sometimes our theology that we teach in the classroom isn't as good as what some of the artists come up with, because they see it from a wider standpoint. Anyway, going on to verse 14, you answered me, what you propose to do is good. So I took the leading men of your tribes, wise and respected men, and appointed them to have authority over you, as commanders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and as tribal officials. I charged your judges at that time, hear the disputes between your brothers and judge fairly, whether the case is between brother Israelites or between one of them and an alien. Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of any man, for judgment belongs to God. Bring me any case too hard for you, and I will hear it. And at that time I told you everything you were to do. Okay. What's the first responsibility of a judge?
To hear cases.
To judge fairly.
To hear the case. Okay, and in Jewish law, this is very important. You have to hear both sides, completely. Both sides get to make their case. Okay, you think it was that way in the Babylon?
No, the king's law was was it.
Well, it's still the king's law, but the question is, do you hear both sides?
No.
Not necessarily.
No, rich people and powerful people get heard. The poor, on the other hand, don't get heard. Okay, it's unusual to have a country where the law is to hear both sides. Okay, now in America, theoretically, we have that, but in actuality, do we?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. When I was a little kid, we're going down to my uncle's place in the Keys, and there was a median. We had pulled off, and we're sitting perpendicular to the road, and a guy in a Rolls Royce, I remember this guy very clearly, short red hair with a full red beard, just loses control of his car like a quarter to a half mile away, is running up on the parkway, skidding through the rocks, gets to where he's going to hit us, he turns sideways and hits us sideways.
Wow.
The cops came and never talked to us. They talked to the guy with the Rolls Royce, they never even talked to us. Okay, that's not justice. That's not the way the law is supposed to be. In Israel, depending on how good or how obedient your judges were, they heard both sides, because God said, hear both sides. Then he says to judge fairly. Okay, well, that's based on the law. Okay. And he includes another thing here. He says it doesn't matter if it's between two Israelites or an Israelite and a foreigner. Okay, and the word alien here is ger, someone who's traveling with you or in your country living with you. Hear them equally. Okay?
Wow.
Think that was a common law in the ancient world? No. And so the scripture in the Torah says repeatedly, you shall have one law for yourself and the stranger.
Right.
Okay. Now, just off the top of your head, did Rome operate like that?
No.
No, they had special laws for the Jews. They had special laws for other people. They were very much ethnically oriented. We'll have this law for them because we either like them or don't like them. Okay, and sometimes you wonder, gee, wouldn't it be nice to make some special laws to repress a certain group of people that you don't like? Okay, America has tried to follow the scriptural basis. Okay, but there are certain groups that always clamor for special rights. Okay, special rights for any group is wrong, and special restrictions for a group are wrong. Okay. We shouldn't, in our case today, one of the hot issues is what to do with Muslims. Because they're rising up and wanting special rights. Okay, well, should we make special rights for them, or should we make special restrictions for them? No, they should be treated exactly the same as everybody else. You have other groups coming up, and this may strike you oddly, but crimes against seniors. Why are crimes against seniors why should they be punished more strictly than crimes against anybody else?
They are weak and vulnerable.
But if you commit a crime against someone else, have they not been weak and vulnerable enough to succumb to your
Yes.
crime?
Right. I don't think, there shouldn't be special rights.
At first glance, it looks like a
That
good
was a
thing,
mistake.
but if you think more deeply, it shouldn't be done.
Yeah, at first glance, it looks like a good idea, or so-called hate crimes. Okay, you're just making special classes so that the government can pick out someone that they want to take out. And of course, the government is always free to pay attention to or ignore their own laws.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes you're just giving the government a club to use against somebody. Okay, one law, you know. And it says you shall hear both small and great alike. And this could apply either to the individuals or to the case. Okay, the Hebrew on this is not really clear. We know you should hear individuals, whether they're big people or little people, hear them equally. But then again, the question is, some people will pay attention to a big case. If you have something that's a multi-million-dollar case, well, we're going to pay real attention to this. Okay, but someone comes up with a little case. It's only, you know, a $200 case. Well, are you going to take it seriously? Okay, if it comes
It's
before
equally important to the,
yeah, it's really important to the person who's bringing the case.
yeah.
Okay, and they're coming for justice. And if you just blow it off because it's little, well, you may just destroy someone's life because what's little to you is not little to them. Society would be just so much better if people just did what they were supposed to do. You know, think about it. You know, when you read the 613 commandments, and I finally did this a few years back. Avdi's Ben Mordecai's book lists them all in the back. And I went through it, and once you isolate the special rules for priests or the special rules for women and cleanness and things like that, once you get rid of all the specialty rules, when you read it, the Torah just says, be a decent person. That's all it boils down to. Be a decent person. Okay? And then the ritual laws that apply to everybody, everywhere, are simple. I mean, you know, eat kosher, you know, keep the Sabbath. Okay? It's not burdensome. And yet, in the Bible college I went to, they treated the Torah like it was this horrible burden that nobody could ever possibly live with. And boy, aren't we glad Jesus did away with it. You know, but when you actually read it, it's not like that. In fact, I read Deuteronomy one summer while I was in Bible college. I was home at my mom's fish camp, and I read through the book of Deuteronomy, and I thought, this is beautiful. Because I kind of discovered the idea of the love being behind the law. Because I looked at each one and I said, what's the principle that this law is based on? And it was care for people. It was care for nature. It was just, you know, I'm going to call my commentary on Deuteronomy, the law of love, or the gospel of love, something like that, because love is all through it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I've been working at book you talking about?
I think it's Messiah 2.
Messiah 2.
I think that's where it's listed.
All right. Back to Scripture.
Go back to Scripture, and the idea here is that you don't show any partiality on anything. You judge the case. And there's a couple stories. One that sticks in mind is the story of a Babylonian teacher, Samuel. When I say Babylonian teacher, you realize that in the exile, Israel goes into exile, Judah goes to Babylon, a large community developed in Babylon. Only a few of them came back to live in the land. The majority stayed there. So you have a Babylonian community, okay, that developed, well, let's put it this way. There's two Talmuds. There's the Jerusalem Talmud, which is like 12 volumes long. And then you have the Babylonian Talmud, which is like 36 volumes long. Okay, which do you think were more in depth? Okay.
36.
Yeah, the Babylonian Jews were considered the scholars and more holy than the Jews who lived in Israel. Okay, I'm not going to judge that myself, you know, because we're dealing with oral law. But they certainly compounded it. They were much more intricate. Okay, so when I say that a Babylonian teacher named Samuel, this is not a Babylonian, this is a Babylonian Jewish rabbi, okay, who was a judge. And the story is told that he was traveling to a city where he was going to adjudicate a case. And he comes to a stream, and there's a plank across the stream. And it's kind of rickety. And so he goes to walk across it carefully, and a man from the other side reaches out and says, let me help you across. You know, and he helps him across onto the other side so he doesn't fall in the creek. And he introduces himself. And Samuel turns to him and says, I'm sorry that you helped me across the creek, because I'm here to judge your case, and I cannot judge it fairly. Now, if you've been kind to me, I'll have to turn it over to somebody else. Okay, and this is just illustrating the principle of how strictly Jewish judges dealt with impartiality. Think of a Christian in history who is an example of that kind of impartiality. Sir Thomas More. Okay, Sir Thomas More, and they make the point in the movie, he's going in to judge cases, people give him certain gifts, and he has, I forget the man's name, it's a guy named Cromwell, not the Cromwell, but a man named, I think it's Thomas Cromwell, is there trying to get a job in government, okay? And Sir Thomas More is sitting in the boat being rowed back up to where his estate is, and he takes this very expensive, heavy silver cup, and he flips it over, and he says, and on the bottom it says, a gift from, and it names one of the people he's supposed to judge the case from. He immediately takes the cup and tosses it off the side of the boat. And Thomas Cromwell there is like, he's ready to dive in the water to grab this cup. And Cromwell says, no, that's supposed to prejudice me. That's a bribe. The law is supposed to be impartial. And one of the things that they bring up in that movie, too, is a young person asks Moore, he says, would you give the devil the benefit of law? And he says, yes. If you don't give the devil the benefit of law, how will you give it to everybody else? You have to be consistent. There's one law for everybody. Okay, and so within the church history, there are people who have stood up with the same kind of reputation as the rabbis. But that kind of person is rare. But it's what we're supposed to aspire to. Because as a judge, what are you doing? Who are you?
You're standing in the place of God as a judge.
Exactly. You're standing in God's place. You're His representative. And so when you're practicing as a judge, you are doing a very religious thing. The other story that I wanted to relate is one that came out of the Chumash. If you have your Chumash with you, it's on page 739 on the section dealing with verse 16. And this talks about in the regular translation talks about if, judgment between you and Israelite and a ger with you. And some of the rabbis interpret that as a ger living in your house, probably as a servant. Okay, so they had to comment on that with the story. So the rabbis sometimes understood this in the sense of inhabiting his house, therefore more in his power. The very life of such a man may depend on justice being granted him. The wife of a Hasidic rabbi, having quarreled with her maid, was setting out to the magistrate to lodge her complaint. Noticing that her husband was about to accompany her, she asked him whither he was bound. To the magistrate, he said. His wife declared that it was beneath his dignity to take any part in a quarrel with a servant. She could deal with the matter herself. The Tzaddik replied, now, notice he's called a Tzaddik. What is a Tzaddik?
Righteous.
Tzaddik is a righteous man.
Siddur.
Okay. Kadosh should be holy. Tzaddik is the idiomatic term for a righteous man. Okay, if you watch the movie The Chosen, you hear Daniel describe his father not as a rabbi, but as a tzaddik. Okay, there are many rabbis, very few tzaddiks. Okay, but the tzaddik stands out as like he's almost like a Messiah figure. This is a righteous man who stands up and is righteous at all times. Our goal in life is to be a tzaddik. Okay, anyway, he describes this man as a tzaddik. The tzaddik replied, that may be, but I intend to represent your maid, who, when accused by you, will find no one willing to take her part. And then bursting into a passion of tears, he quoted Job 31:13. If I despise the cause of my manservant or of my maidservant when they contend with me, what then shall I do when God rises up? In other words, if I don't stand up for them, then when God judges me, who's going to stand up for me? In other words, by extending your servant that courtesy means that you'll have someone to represent you. And of course, what's the role of Messiah? Okay, 1 John says we have an advocate with God the Father, Messiah, the righteous. Okay. So, anyway, judgment is a very important thing. Now, when it says bringing any case too hard for you, and I will hear it, he's not saying this is not an appeals court. This is not saying you tried it and then you're kicking it back to me. No, he's saying if you don't know what to do with it, then send it to me. Don't make a judgment and then have me reverse it. Okay, and going back to verse 19. Then as Yahweh our God commanded us, we set out from Horeb and went toward the hill country of the Amorites, through all that vast and dreadful desert that you have seen. And so we reached Kadesh Barnea. Then I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which Yahweh our God is giving us. See, Yahweh your God has given you the land. Go up and take possession of it, as Yahweh, the God of your fathers, told you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And again, when he mentions Yahweh, the God of our fathers, again, he's bringing that covenant promise. God promises to you, go take possession of it. Now, anybody know what the word is?
Sinai.
It's Sinai. Yeah, it's just another name for Sinai. Someday I'm going to try and figure out what the Hebrew word actually means, but yeah, it's just synonymous with Sinai. Then verse 22, then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to spy out the land for us, and bring back a report about the route we are to take and the towns we come to. Now, Numbers 13 gives this whole story. Okay, and when you put all the accounts together, what you find out is that the people suggested sending the spies. Moses approved it, he didn't like the idea, and God only kind of okayed it. God went, well, okay, you got to, yeah. And you can pick this up in the difference in language, where it says, okay. Well, there's a difference in language. Oh, okay, that's why I'm looking in the wrong place. Numbers 13:2, he says, send for thyself, okay, spies. Okay, contrast that language with Numbers 11:16, where he says to appoint elders, and he says, gather for me. Okay, when the spies are gathered, he doesn't say gather them for me, gather them for yourselves. In other words, I'll go along with this, but it's not for me. This isn't my direction, this is yours. And sometimes a little turn of a phrase there gives you a little bit more insight into God's thinking on something. It's kind of like when Yeshua refutes the whole idea of there being no resurrection, and he quotes Exodus 3, he says, I am the Father, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this whole argument turns on the tense of a verb. Okay? I am, not I was. Anyway, so God went along with it. Verse 23, the idea seemed good to me, so I selected 12 of you, one man from each tribe. They left and went up into the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and explored it. Taking with them some of the fruit of the land, they brought it down to us and reported, it is a good land that Yahweh our God is giving us. There was a kind of interesting comment on verse 23. But as they go up to spy out the land, it didn't occur to me until I was reading last night that they're not just looking at towns and stuff like that. They're looking at roadways. Okay, what roads can we travel on? Now think about this. You've got a group of what? 3 to 6 million people. Okay, 600,000 of them are fighting men. You're not going to go down a road that you can only fit 3 people across on. Okay, you have to look for main highways to travel an army like that. So the spies aren't just looking at the cities and the people. They're looking at what route are we going to follow? How are we going to conduct this campaign? I hadn't really thought about that before. So he sends out the spies. The idea seemed good to them. Okay, they brought back the fruit, and it was in the valley of Eshcol, evidently, that they got the fruit, and also where they saw the Anakim. Now, 2 things have come up in our reading so far. It calls the inhabitants of the land Amorites rather than Canaanites. Well, Amorite was just the general blanket term they're using at this time. Sometimes they'll use Canaanites, and sometimes Amorites. I guess the Amorites were the first group they ran into here, so they're kind of using that loosely. The other thing is the Anakites. And the Anakim are giants. Now it's interesting because they've actually uncovered 2 skeletons in Israel of women who were 7 feet tall. Now if you think about it, if the women are 7 feet tall, how tall are the men? The men typically are bigger, and in those days, probably men and women didn't share food as equally as they do today. And so a lot of times in history, women are shorter and more stunted than the men because the men got the good food, the women got the leftovers. Okay, well, when you bring nutrition up to where it's more equal, women get bigger in size. I don't know how they treated this, but the men at least are over 7 feet tall because men just typically are bigger than women. I mean, that's not a matter of prejudice on my case. That's just a matter of observation, So,
Women tend to live longer too.
yes, much longer. Anyway, they report that it's a good land, but we're scared of the Anakim. Verse 26. But you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of Yahweh your God. You grumbled in your tents and said, Yahweh hates us. So he brought us up out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Where can we go? Our brothers have made us lose heart. They say, the people are stronger and taller than we. The cities are large, with walls up to the sky. We even saw the Anakites there.
The Anakites, they were the giants.
They were the giants.
Philistines and all.
Okay, so they're unwilling to go, and people, we read into God's motives what we feel ourselves. Okay, when they say Yahweh hates us, okay, they're probably feeling put upon by God, and so they're reading their motives and feelings onto God. And sometimes, especially as a parent, sometimes you're trying to do something that is good for your kid. They don't understand the principle you're really trying to teach them. They only know what they want to do. Okay? Well, you hate me because you're not going to let me do this. Well, no, that's not really it. I really love you, and I don't want you to go to this rock concert or whatever, because I know the temptations are going to be there, and I know exactly what's going to happen if you go. Okay? So I'm putting up with your thinking I hate you and your anger towards me, but I'm really looking out for your good. And if I didn't really love you, I would give in to you. Okay? And God is being very loving here in putting up with these people. Now, there's a line they're going to cross where he's still going to put up with them, because even when he condemns them to spend 40 years in the desert, does he take care of them during that 40 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, verse 29, Then I said to you, do not be terrified, do not be afraid of them. Yahweh your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes. And in the desert you saw how Yahweh your God carried you, as a father carries his son, all the way you went until you reached this place. Okay. Now, he's tossing them back and saying, what about your own experience? When he says, before your eyes, and again, that phrase is going to come up 10 more times. Or what has God done in the past? Okay, think about this. The people that would be 60 at this time were 20 or younger back then. So some of them did see it. But then there's also the question of daily manna. Have they seen God provide manna for them for 40 years?
Yes.
Yeah. Have they seen God repeatedly provide them with water?
Yes.
Yeah. Have they seen him provide them with quail? Yes. Have they seen him maintain their clothes? Remember, their clothes didn't wear out, okay, for the 40 years. Okay? So they have seen enough testimony to know that God is reliable. God is a consistent source of provision for them. Okay? Also, when on the occasion that they've been attacked, like by the Amalekites, God won the battle for them. Moses had to keep the staff raised up in the air, and they won. Okay, God has watched over and protected them for 40 years, so they have seen it. They do have an experience to look back on and say, yeah, God is faithful. And Moses describes it as Yahweh your God carried you as a father carries his son. All the way you went until you reached this place. What resources did the Israelites have to provide for themselves, really? I mean, are they out farming? Yeah. They don't have anything out in the desert. Now, some of the rabbinic traditional history says that they did stop at times, for years on one place and farm and do things under the cover of the cloud, and they had their own ecoculture. Ed can tell you more about that than I can.
I was just thinking a couple days ago about the cloud by day and the fire by night, and the harmful effects of the sun's rays when it's really, really hot, especially out there in that desert, probably 125 degrees. And the cloud that was going up, and he's leading, so the cloud is covering the children of Israel as they're following him.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, that really came alive to me in a special way yesterday.
And that would be another one of those provisions that they would have seen.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever noticed a cloud stuck around for 40 years?
Wow.
I mean, they would move whenever the cloud moved, okay?
Yes.
Which means the cloud was with them for 40 years, okay? That's unusual. And it's funny. Sometimes we see God do things so regular that it becomes commonplace to us, so we don't take it into account. Okay? and here you see this cloud moving around with you every day for 40 years, you don't begin to think about the miraculousness of that. Okay, that's really outstanding. Okay, an outsider would see this and go, wow, that's really cool. The Israelites are like, oh, it just happens that way every day. We got used to it.
Wow. Man.
And this text and Hosea 11:1 through C, Hosea 11:1 through 3, not C, prepares the way for the expression "Our Father in Heaven," which, interestingly enough, is used in Pharisaic circles before Yeshua puts it in a large prayer. He's not pulling something out of the hat; it's never been heard before. And of course, Yeshua is in line with the Pharisees more than he is with anybody else. You'd probably class him as a Pharisee. Okay, so his use of "Our Father in Heaven" is something they would already be familiar with. Verse 32. In spite of this, you did not trust in Yahweh your God, who went ahead of you on your journey in fire by night and in cloud by day, to search out places for you to camp and to show you the way you should go. Well, that's right. One of the other things that they had to look for good places to camp. You don't just plop 3 million people down anywhere. You know, picking out a campground is hard enough for a family. I remember my mom going through all these books. She had to make sure there was something there for everybody. There had to be fishing for my brother. There had to be swimming for me. And if you got 3 million people, just think of how many other requests you have to fulfill. Is there a good place to put the latrine? Yes. Verse 34. When Yahweh heard what you said, he was angry and solemnly swore, not a man of this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give the fathers, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land he set his feet on, because he followed Yahweh wholeheartedly. Okay, now,
That's the joke. I remember when Kathy read that. Caleb, that's Joshua.
yeah,
Who becomes the leader replacing Moses.
yeah, it's interesting because it also leaves out someone else who is going to survive this.
Oh, yeah, that was,
Phineas.
Phineas.
Yeah.
Phineas. It doesn't mention specifically he's going to survive it, but we see him in the book of Judges later on. Okay, and so he's making a point. You know, Caleb was faithful, and Caleb seems to be maybe even a stronger ringleader and standing up for Yahweh here than Joshua was. Okay, he's special about. But yeah, we also know that Joshua is also going to go in, and we also know from cross-referencing that Phineas will go in. Okay, so you've got 2 people that get left out in this particular case. But is he saying, when you read Scripture, does God say everything can be said about something? No.
No.
You can never say everything. You know, you can never make a basic statement unless you're going to realize that there are still more things to say. And that's the problem when it comes to teaching. What to include to teach in a class and what to cut out. Because there's always something more to say. Okay, do I tell you everything I know about this when I teach it? No. We'd never get through chapter 1. You know, so I know you already think I take too long, but, you know.